Welcome to this episode of Season 4 of The Common Bridge, where policy and current events are discussed in a fiercely nonpartisan manner. The host, Richard Helppie, is a philanthropist, entrepreneur, and political analyst who has reached over 3.5 million listeners, viewers, and readers around the world. The Common Bridge is available on the Substack website and the Substack app. Just search for The Common Bridge. You can find the program on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. The Common Bridge draws guests and audiences from across the political spectrum, and we invite you to become a free or paid subscriber on your favorite medium.
Cool. Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Common Bridge. You have a special treat today. Rich is approaching his 200th episode here in a couple of weeks, and I thought I would drop my head in here. I'm Brian. I'm the producer that you hear about every now and then. And so, Rich, welcome. I'm glad you're back from a really cool vacation. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit about what's gone on over the past 3.5 seasons. Does that sound all right?
Aloha, Brian. Okay, that's the tell about where the vacation was. It's a wonderful place. I highly recommend. It's not only climate, it's culture, music, people, gentleness. If you haven't been, save up. It's worth it.
Great. So I want to go through a little bit, a few things with the Common Bridge, because it's been, and we can pat each other on the back right here. It's been very successful, probably more than we even imagined. We're over 3.5 million viewers, listeners, and readers, which is a great testament to how this thing has gone, and certainly to you and your guests. And speaking of guests, I want to go back and talk about some of them that we've had a long time ago, and even current. We've had them come back. But moreover, some of them that have really gone on to do some interesting things, and just interesting guests that we have. I want to start back too with, and maybe this won't even be in chronological order. In fact, it won't be. Let me ask you about John Bacon. We had John Bacon here a couple of weeks ago. Tell the audience and remind them who he is if they don't know who he is, and we'll go from there.
Great. And Brian, if you don't mind, if I could, before we talk about any of the episodes and guests, I first want to thank the audience. And I appreciate that you not only listen and you view and you read, but hopefully you're telling your friends and hopefully you're coming on to Substack. There's no cost. And adding to the comments, I get a lot of private messaging, which I do appreciate. I'd like to stimulate a little bit of conversation. And one of the things in reflecting on these nearly 200 episodes is this. The Common Bridge was set up so that we could start talking to each other, get off these polarized extremes. And there's no way that somebody way over on this pole is going to convince, cajole, threaten, motivate somebody way over on this pole to come all the way over here, and vice versa. Okay, that's not going to happen. But maybe if we can reason together, we could come up with policies and approaches that are at least better than where we're at today. And I think we've had some good progress on that. And my lessons and my takeaways are a couple of things. First of all, there's better information readily available outside of the cesspools of the most popular social media, big tech, censored, monitored platforms. There's better information available outside of this right versus left, conservative versus liberal / progressive, red versus blue media system. And in fact, one of our earlier guests, Matt Taibi, who wrote books about the Great Divide and Hate Inc. and the Insane Clown President, explaining all this, we've seen it manifest. And so the bad news is that business model's still going. And I can punctuate it like this. And two recent guests. We had Dr. Lorraine Starr on talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And when we promoted that episode, the right wing went berserk. And a lot of them, you could read the comments that they hadn't actually heard or read or listened to the episode, but boy, did they ever know where they stood. The next week, we had a conservative columnist, Adam Coleman, asking as a question, does the media treat the conservative voice unfairly. And we promoted it, and the left went berserk. And so that, I think, talks about the problem. But when I think about the solution, how many learned people we've had come on and talk to us about immigration, about election laws, about the environment, about energy policy, about where we're at with big tech, whether the war in the Ukraine was legal, what does it look like from a historical standpoint, and of course, uh, where were we on COVID? What should we do about guns and healthcare? There's better stuff out there. And I just want to encourage everybody to leave that old media model behind, leave that old political thinking behind, because we're going to keep doing it as long as we keep consuming it. So let's think about that new media model. Now, Brian, I think the question you had was John U. Bacon. Okay, that was kind of a fun interview. We talked college football between the holidays. With every one of my guests, I learn things, and it makes me think. And I have the common bridge not to influence people, but really to inform them. And then because I'm a problem solver, my skill set was in writing computer code. You're always trying to solve a problem, or starting a business. You're trying to solve a problem for a client. It's just kind of the way I'm wired. So I learn things and I think, well, what would be a better solution? So, or what comes next? And so John Bacon comes on and we kind of go through the economics of college football and what they're going to be doing. And it's like, well, I kind of think that we're looking at some point separating those football teams from the universities. Maybe there'll still be an ownership interest, but like it'll be like a minor league. And I don't know, something like every person gets to play 55 games or until they turn 30, and then you're out of the league if you don't make the NFL by then. None of this student eligibility and redshirting and all that, and transfer portals, and just come on, it's a pro league. Let's just call it that. So anyway, John was a great interview, but we've had some other ones. And
I want to take you back to episode 158. And trust me on this one. It was called Woman Erased, How Degendering is Eliminating the Biological Woman. And that was with Trisha Posner. And it was back in June of 2022. And man, did that thing blow up on social media. The comments, hundreds, it got very, very aggressive. Would you like to comment on that one? I thought that was an amazing interview.
Yeah, I would, and I don't really fear being canceled because it's not, you've got to be fearless about this. So first of all, because of my deep connections in the healthcare industry and in dealing with the data all the time and having lots of contacts, I did talk to a lot of people. And what everyone should understand is that any kind of thing that can happen in utero does happen. And there are things, there are people that are born with indeterminate genitalia. There are people that are born with different chromosome mixes. There are people that may have a penis, but also ovaries, and people that have a vagina, but they may have testicles, gonads up, and so it's a complex thing, and we need to do right by all the people that are affected with the most compassion. But now as I start seeing this trend toward, well, we're going to not tell parents and we're going to regender or gender affirm or degender adolescents, I think, okay, if this was such a big problem and for so long, wouldn't it stand to reason that we should have a cadre of 25-year-olds and 35-year-olds and 50-year-olds and 60-year-olds saying, hey, I been in the wrong body. I should have had gender affirming care. I didn't. I'm going to go get it now. Shouldn't that be kind of a tidal wave if it's so popular today? And then I think about the process is that a young person going through a difficult and much changing part of life and say, I don't feel like a man. Well, guess what? You haven't been one yet. Okay. You still got to get there. You've got to let the process continue. You haven't been, I don't feel like a woman. Well, of course you don't, because you haven't been there yet. And then the industry, and I'm using that term industry on purpose, with these young people that says, okay, so to be your natural self, we're going to shut down the hormones that your body is naturally producing. Okay, that doesn't make sense. Well, wait a minute. And then we're going to introduce, to make you more natural, hormones that are unnatural to your body. And then, well, we find out what, something, you're still not feeling great. You're still feeling lost. You're still feeling depressed. Well, let's go surgically. And now you've passed the point of no return. You can never undo it. And while we need that compassion for folks that need to become aligned, or if they become an adult and want to do something with their body, fantastic. Okay, it's a free country. Go ahead. But this notion that we have all these adolescents who mysteriously need gender affirming care, I don't see the logic in it. And it just feels to me like other people have said, like, it's the new lobotomy. Okay, we're probably canceled off 9 platforms now. What else you want to talk about?
Well, I want to talk to you about something I think is really, really interesting. We've had a journalist and longtime Rolling Stone writer, Matt Taibi, on twice. And the
Yeah.
reason I say twice and why I want to bring this up is when we first had him on, he was kind of a darling of the left as a longtime journalist for the Rolling Stone. And he came out, spent a lot of time in Soviet Union. I don't think he grew up there, but he spent some time there.
Yeah, he lived there
And
in both Soviet Russia and in post-Soviet Russia.
yeah, and then and he was a great guest and really gracious with his time, both times. But by the second time we had him on, the left started to reject him. Do you want to talk a little bit about how cool it was having Matt on, and we'll probably have him on again, but what that was like and kind of how that's fluctuated and how maybe it speaks to the common bridge?
Yeah, well, Matt's problem, okay, is I think real clear. All right, Matt's a real journalist. Matt goes and gets firsthand information, interviews people, looks at documents, experiences it, and writes it, and he just tells what he sees. This is not the way journalism is practiced. And we've had other guests on the show talking about this in a similar vein, including speech codes and such. And if anybody's credentials are strong, look at again his books, The Great Divide, Hate Incorporated, Insane Clown President. He's an avowed Democrat, left-leaning Bernie Sanders supporting guy, but he's not. And when he goes to Loudoun County, Virginia, and says this whole thing's been misreported because he actually went there, um, and it blows up the narrative that was put down by the left. Instead of attacking the story, which they can't, instead of attacking the facts, which they can't, they attack him. It's patently absurd. Another guy, Thomas Frank, if you remember, a great 2-part series, and we actually republished it. I think we're a little early with the story, talking about populism.
Yeah.
And this was a guy that thinks that the liberal left has kind of gone too far. And the guy, again, he's far from being a far right guy. He's not even a right wing guy, but he just got beat up. Yeah. And, look, of course, this happens on both sides. A person that's on the right that goes to the left is all of a sudden a pariah. Just, I guess the bigger picture is this, Brian. We don't all have to be red, blue, right, left, whatever. It's like, can we deal with facts again, please? Can we actually have a conversation?
Well, it kind of gets back to something that you talked about this show. We're not about sound bites. We're on for an hour. Right? Sometimes the stuff goes longer than an hour, and you guys have long discussions, and it really starts to ferret out what the ideas are. But like you say, if it doesn't fit up with the right or left narrative, we get in a little bit of trouble. Which brings me to
I agree, Brian. We suck at sound bites. And a little tip that I use when I listen to podcasts, on your device, you can speed it up 1.25 speed, 1.5 speed, 2 speed,
right.
something so you keep going, or the nice leisurely pace. But when we had Jerry Clayton on, the sheriff of Washtenaw County, he said at the end of the interview, he said, I usually have 30 or 40 seconds to try to say something. He goes, this was great having this nuanced conversation. And Sheriff Clayton was a guy that really gives you good comfort because he and um, former Detroit Police Chief James Craig, Bruce Helppie, my cousin, lots
Yeah.
of experience in the police force as a patrol officer. You get the idea there's a lot of good things and a lot of good people out there, and that we don't need to. We need to be honest. We need to report the negative. We need to clean up, um, and we need to keep it in context.
Yeah. Um, Back in I think it was August of 2001, we had comic, and it's funny that back then that was his main call to, or his main authority, was he was a comedian, and that's Constantine Kissing. And Kissing now is really blown up on the world stage, most recently at the Oxford University. I think it was the debate club, and you can see it on YouTube, and it's really gone viral what he's been talking about with cancel culture. Do you want to comment a little bit about what it was like having Constantine on the show? I know we had a good time with him because it was fun, but
Yeah, Constantine's got a great view. Um, guy that had to leave Russia, move to London, build his life from there, and he goes to Oxford and he speaks candidly, and nobody could argue with him. So what they want to do is they want to attack him or basically idolize him. All right. And instead of let's have a discussion about what he said, did he go too far in one spot? Was he trying to make a joke, etc.? But it was a brilliant short video. If you look it up on YouTube, Constantine Kissing. And yes, indeed, we hope to have him back. He's pretty famous now, so hopefully he'll watch this and we can bring him back a little bit. Constantine, we'd love to have you. But it also, the thought occurred to me, what if we sent him to a university in Oregon? What if we sent him to Princeton? What if he wanted to go speak at Columbia?
or
These
Berkeley,
at
right?
Berkeley, and these are
Yeah,
all places that, instead of listening to someone's ideas, will chase them from the stage and write to the university. Don't let this person come on campus. And there was a time when universities were a place to exchange thought and for a person to learn and to grow. And now we're getting into this not only reckless of let's suppress speech, this goes beyond the college campus, but it's what's the required speech. You didn't say these five things,
right.
and the denial's palpable.
Rich,
Um,
who was our guest that we had on from? Was it Penn State alumni on free speech, college free speech?
That was on Princeton,
Princeton.
and yeah, it was,
That's right.
and it was a great piece. And this is part of the group called FIRE, FIRE. I don't remember what that stands for, but it talks about speech rights.
Yeah.
And I won't tell you the persuasion of the person I was talking to, but I had a friend, PhD, college professor, and making the case for speech codes as a good thing, and restricting what people could put on their caps, on their t-shirts, on what they could say and such. And I said, great. I said, let's put those in place, and I'll be a one-person committee to decide what's in bounds and out of bounds. And the look on my friend's face was priceless. It's like, well, no, we don't want you. I go, okay, well, who do you want to have all this power? Okay.
Who's going to adjudicate that? Right.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Like, all right, well, and that's the fallacy that I see on this right versus left, is that they all imagine they're going to be in 100% control, that the other side's going to go away.
Yeah.
And we've had on the show, and I've done editorials and solo episodes about the parallels leading up to the Civil War of the 1860s. And if we're not in a civil war now, we are so damn close. It's highly concerning. And of course, I've commented on things that our current President Unity, has done, and even his most vocal critics are kind of cringing at his Philadelphia speech. I mean, where are the statespeople that are saying, can we reason together, and please, I want to be your president, your senator, everybody's, so.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're absolutely right on that one. So what you're saying is it's coming down to not necessarily what policy is with some of these folks now. It's like whose team are you on?
Yeah.
And it just it becomes like an old kickball game in elementary school. It's like I don't care what your thoughts are. You're going to be on my team or not be on my team.
Yep.
And that's what happened. That's what's happened to Taibi, I think, unfortunately. And then once Elon Musk hired him to look through the Twitter papers, that just solidified him into the group that let's hate
Yeah.
this guy and Musk and everything.
And look, uh, our FBI director going to Davos and saying there's been great strides between government and big tech platforms. Like, it's okay. What kind of society are we going to have if the federal agencies, those elected and those part of the bureaucracy, control gets printed and what the truth is?
Yeah. You've had a couple of guests throughout the years, throughout the seasons that have been great for us and great for them as well, um, because they get to say what they mean in within an hour or so. And one of them is Dr. James Baker, a University of Michigan professor emeritus in internal medicine, and he's been back a few times, both in studio. I think he's always been in studio. No, we had him online and in studio.
Yes.
But talk about how important he's been through COVID. I mean, that guy's been gold for this show.
Dr. Baker has been phenomenal. He's now on a local TV program on a fairly regular basis, and always willing to come back and talk to us on the Common Bridge. Um, I think he's really represents the best of research and medicine and how and vaccines. I mean, when you look at his credentials, he had been with the military for a period of time. He ran the vaccine program at Merck. He is a physician and a researcher at Michigan Medicine and immunology. And so his learned voice really was kind of what we all should have been doing. Like, when we hit this thing with COVID, people were looking for absolutes. And he really said, here's what we know today. Here's how this vaccine is designed to work based on what we know today. And as more data and more evidence comes forward, he's been able to talk about what the differences are. And I don't think the guy's a political bone in his body.
Right.
He's just a scientist.
Yeah.
Yet at the same time, we now know that there was a absolute truth provided about what was the origins of the virus itself. And when we talk about the vaccines, let's be very candid. We're all in the petri dish.
Yeah.
Nobody knows exactly what's going to happen because there hasn't been time for any long-term testing. And so when your friends are telling you they don't work and you know that you'd be a fool to get them, but we all know people that didn't get them that died from COVID. I know I did.
Mm-hmm.
And you have people that are saying, oh, I'm going to go collect as many as I can. And then they've got 4 shots, 5 shots, and then they've got a heavy dose of COVID. So the data is still elusive at this point, but as it pertains to our show, it's about informing where we stand today. And early on, we had Dr. Martin Coldoff from the Harvard School of Medicine, highly qualified man, saying that we were going down the wrong path from a public health perspective. And very early on, is like, we shouldn't be closing the schools. We should be protecting the vulnerable, researching a vaccine. But most people weren't going to get very sick. Very, very few children were affected at all, period, full stop. And he was suppressed, kicked off Twitter. There's emails that are inside of the NIH about trying to disparage the guy. Mm-hmm. And when you look back, he was right.
And Rich, your show was one of the only shows that gave him that kind of room to explain what he was talking about. He was shut down around the world for the Great Barrington Declaration. Him and his 2 other colleagues shut down. But early on, and that was during the heat of that, you were one of the only shows that would give him, as much time as he needed to explain what their theory was.
Exactly. And both Dr. Coldoff and Dr. Baker, had lots of deep knowledge about the Spanish flu. And I like one of the lines from Dr. Baker. He said, "We knew that epidemic was over when people stopped dying in the streets." Okay, which okay, good. And with COVID, we really don't know when it's over because we find lots of asymptomatic positive results.
Yeah. On
So,
that same vein, you've had a couple of other reoccurring guests that have been a lot of fun for us and really informative. One of them is Professor Anthony Colangelo, who kind of spans the globe with some of his. It's like if you come up with something that you're reading about that week, sometimes you go, well, let's see what Professor Colangelo has to say, and he's great. He comes on and talks about it, and tell us about how important he's been to the show.
well, I think he's a great example because um, when the news reports things and they're first they start with their narrative. It's a right narrative or it's a left narrative, and then they go in and try to fill in the blanks, and then they go and try to get a sound bite from somebody that they put in there, and then they literally look at a monitor in their newsroom to see how many clicks, likes, shares, and such of that article they get. Okay, they're not starting with first like a real journalist should do.
Right.
What came first, what's happening now, what might the future look like. Okay. um, and what Dr. Or Professor Colangelo is so good about and so comforting is that a lot of the things that we see have already been codified in international law. And he spoke about, was it legal for NATO to defend Ukraine? And guess what? Somebody's actually thought about that before. And Professor Jesse Kaufman from Eastern Michigan University talking about all the ways the lines are moving in Ukraine and what's happened before and what may happen next. And his prognostication was this war does not end without regime change, either in Kyiv or in Moscow. And we're still waiting to see the results of that. Um, so it just gives me great comfort to know that there are good people out there that have a command of this subject matter. And what I'm imploring my readers and my viewers and my listeners to do is to let people know about this program, and you can get real information. Now, by the way, you're not going to agree with this. This is not in a affirmation program. It's not affirmation programming at all. It is, this is, I will always try to say this is what the person's qualifications are, let them explain where they're from. I try to ask questions that their critics might be asking, and I try to let them have an opportunity to explain the nuance.
Yeah,
And
and
then,
there's
and
so
then,
many
and
good qualified voices out there that and Rick Gettys was another one, Professor Gettys. You
oh,
seem
oh
to
yeah,
find these people and they love being on, and there's so many more of them than there are talking heads that say the same thing on CNN, Fox, or whatever. We find some really interesting people to talk for a long time about, what
yeah,
they're.
and Professor Rick Gettys also on the infrastructure a couple times, and then talking about the history of the post office. And when
That's
you hear a
great.
guy like this, you go, "And we're going to be okay."
That's
And I
right.
remember because I remember asking him in one of the infrastructure, like, "Do we have enough of like people to do this?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, we have the best materials engineers, we have the best civil engineers." It's like, because what do you hear on the mainstream press? Oh, we don't have enough engineers. They're all in India and China and
The
Vietnam.
world's gonna end in 90 seconds.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
exactly.
right.
And so it's good to hear from people like that. And of course, look, they're involved in an international trade. And
Mhm.
so we had Bill Michaels early on. And this guy, if he tells me what numbers to bet in the lottery, I'm going to do that, because when he talked about supply chain and what's going to happen, it's like, yep, 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 yep. It all came to be.
He's
But
coming back in a few weeks. We're gonna
yeah,
have him
and
on as a
indeed,
returning
he
guest.
is he is the godfather of logistics. And then we had Robert Greenfield talking about what's going on in China and China trade and Australia, and Aaron Boski from China talking about what's happening there and how U.S. policies differ. Um, so these are people that have real frontline experience. They don't have an agenda. They're just happy to share. And We're just the bridge, the conduit to get it out there to folks.
Now you've had a few guests and a very few, and I can think of one one in particular who kind of got on the show, thought it was going to be something else, like an affirmation show, and turned out kind of stopped in their tracks a bit on what their narrative was. And one of them was former United States Attorney Barbara McQuaid, and she was on for a two-parter, but I think she came away with a different, or maybe came away with a different point of view because she thought she was going to be able just to do the enlarged soundbite, as it were, but that didn't happen on your show. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Well, look, I love Barbara, right? And I've known her from years back, and she's done some interesting things. Prosecution at Kwame Kilpatrick was one of those, but it's tragic because now she's so predictable. It's hilarious where she's either you can almost pre-write what she's going to say. If it affects the Democrats in a negative way, she's going to come out and tell you why it's good, and then all this like incredibly speculation, a lot of it crazy about well, what could this mean for Trump? And it was oh god, oh, Trump's going to be charged with manslaughter. And exaggerated how many people were
I
killed
remember that.
at the Capitol. And then another low light was going to do a book review when Bill Barr's book came out, and then proudly said, "Well, we didn't read the book." It's like, so your reporting now is less credible than a seventh grade book report, but there's still people that follow this. So, and look, it's not just, she's just, one person we had on. A lot of people don't know that both Tucker Carlson and Rachel Maddow have testified or had testimony on their behalf, sworn testimony that, hey, nobody can take this stuff seriously. We're just entertaining.
Yep.
That's the common bridges difference. We're informing, and yeah, it's might be a little deeper and less emotional response, but you're going to get real information.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, is there anything you'd like to say as we move into the second half of season 4?
I want to hit on a couple things, Brian, about
Sure.
look at, and this is a great example. The largest sector of the economy is healthcare. And in fact, it's the largest sector in the largest economy in the history of the world. And that is not an original view from me, but it's was told to me by a fellow named Ben Rooks. And he attributed it to a fellow named Rich Tarrant. I think Rich had run for office in Vermont. He ran a very successful healthcare IT company. But it's very serious, and it's something that affects everybody. So we've had on the show, and I hope I remember them all, Nate Kaufman, Brian Peters, Dean Clancy, Chris Allen, Carl Albrecht, all from different perspectives about healthcare. And basically and I say we because I also agree, and I've published editorials about this, what to do about healthcare in the United States. Yet the people we actually elect to do that don't do it. And the people that we subscribe to and pay money to and listen to report to us about that don't report to it. And that's, to me, really, we have solvable problems if we can just listen to each other. And, Chris Allen comes from a, urban public health background. Dean Clancy is more, I don't know if libertarian's going too far, but more free market oriented. And they all kind of look at the problem and go, yep, that's the thing we need to do. And of course, we've had Rob Caslew and Wright Lassiter and people actually running health systems coming in and saying, this is what I'm seeing. And then fortunately, we have now moved to the point where we're talking about what's going on with mental health care. Yeah. And we've had Judge Milton Mack on a couple times, who's been a leader in that field. And then recently, Dr. Victor Hong. And then I think this is related. Our most recent episode with Dr. Nicholas Tito talking about the medically assistance in dying in Canada. Yeah. So hopefully we're covering the waterfront there.
I think you'd cover a great amount of that, and hopefully folks will listen to this episode too. If you're in an industry where you feel you might have something to say on this, contact the show too, because we'd like to have you on as a guest
Sure, we'd
as
love to have
well.
guest columnists, guests to appear on the show. Your recommendations for guests would be great, or if you've got just a column in you, you don't have to commit to writing two, but gosh, we'd sure like to hear from you.
Yeah, totally agree on that. So, anything to wrap this episode up? Anything you want to talk to the audience about before we say goodbye?
Um, I just want to say that I think that we have a brighter future than what's represented by the political structure, political systems, and particularly the political parties. Um, and we've covered elections a lot, and ranked choice voting, how elections are conducted in other countries, whether we should have the electoral college or not, proportional voting, what's actually in the voting bills and such. So I think our democracy or constitutional republic form of democracy is in pretty good shape structurally. We just have bad behavior in it. And we're going to keep getting the bad behavior as long as we keep accepting it. And to your earlier point about it becomes a team sport like kickball or dodgeball or something. No, it doesn't matter if your team doing it, if it's a good thing or a bad thing. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Let's start there. And then similarly, the split in the traditional legacy media, cable media that's probably on its way out, and certainly on the social media platforms doing the same thing. They're not serving us. They're not serving regular people. They've got a business model that it depends, and I guess it's my show. I can say it any way I want to. It depends on you being pissed off.
Yeah, keep you angry.
Yep. Yeah, and keep stoking that anger. And we've got a better answer. Let's join the good people and support them in doing good stuff. And they're not always going to be right, and the solutions are not always going to be perfect, but there's good folks working on good stuff, and we have better ways of doing things than what we're doing right now.
Totally agree. And I would argue that the common bridge, and this isn't self-serving, but the common bridge is a place to go where it's not going to feed into your anger. It's going to feed into the information bank that will help you make better decisions and kind of maybe put off those TV shows, what are just TV shows just to keep you angry.
Well, let me give you a quick anecdote. And this is again something that we heard from offline. That one of our support people on the show got an email from a relative that heard the session with Dr. Victor Hong about the state of psychiatric care in the United States today, and it was really interesting. It was like, oh, as soon as he talked about his childhood experience, handling guns, I was going to cut him off. Right? It was like, oh, you fired a gun in your life that I have to stop listening. But she said, the letter that she wrote was, but I kept listening. And then I realized that just by asking insightful questions, you can get a full picture. And by the end of the episode, I found myself more comforted that things were moving along and everybody didn't need to be perfect. Yeah. And that's what we're trying to do here.
Yeah. I think you do it well. As your producer.
Well, I know you'd tell me otherwise, and you're not shy about saying that's a bad idea. So
just to this will be fun for an episode coming up. You and I have talked about this for a while because we have a lot of it, and that's just to kind of go into viewer mail and comment a little bit about what goes on. And I will say this: the viewer mail or the comments that come in on social media, Facebook, that pool. Are way different from the more seemingly educated comments that we get from the Substack side, where people have a little bit more of an in-depth question or an in-depth analysis instead of just reacting to a screenshot or reacting to a graphic. But let's you and I do that again, maybe next week or the week after in a coming episode, because I think that I think the audience would like to hear you respond to some of that as well.
Yeah, and I think you made a good point there. And most of the stuff that we get comes in privately, direct message and such. And occasionally we get posts on Substack, which we'd sure like to have a lot more. And my takeaway is this, that the reactions that we get on some of the other social media platforms where people are identifying themselves is a lot more vitriol and a lot more division. And you can pretty much see, which flag they've got themselves wrapped in. And people that have a more reasoned approach are not as open to just being out there. And I get it, just because of my experience. If I run a program on healthcare, for example, it's not going to make everybody happy. But I want to ask, is it better than what we've had? But I've been attacked as a bleeding heart liberal, a neocon, a Trump, whatever, a Biden. And by the way, that's been on the same episode. Right? So it's like, we gotta,
I know.
we've got to move past that. And so I'd just like to ask people, look, if you go to substack.com, you put in The Common Bridge, please subscribe. Sometimes their links make it think you're going to have to pay for something, whatever. You won't. And you'll get the updates as they come out, generally every week. Mm-hmm. And you can go to your favorite podcast outlet, and you can go to YouTube and look up The Common Bridge or Richard Helppie, and find us there. And, share us with your friends. And just know when you're going in, you're not going to like everything you hear. You're not going to agree with everything. But I'm hoping you're going to come away with more information, and also maybe a little bit of confidence in the future that there's good people out there doing good things.
Well, Rich, with that, we'll wrap this one up. And congratulations on a great run so far. And watching the audience grow has been great from the production end of it. Anyway, it's been a lot of fun to watch.
Well, let me just say this. This is Rich Helppie signing off on The Common Bridge.
Thanks for joining us on The Common Bridge. Subscribe to The Common Bridge on Substack.com or use their Substack app, where you can find more interviews, columns, videos, and nonpartisan discussions of the day. Just search for The Common Bridge. You can also find The Common Bridge on Mission Control Radio on your Radio Garden app.